Volume 1, Book 3, Chapters 1 through 15 of the Life of Apollonius of Tyana. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Apollonius of Tyana by Flavius Philostratus, translated by F. C. Conybeare, Volume 1, Book 3, Chapters 1 through 15. Chapter 1. It is now time to notice the river Hyphasis, and to ask what is its size as it traverses India, and what remarkable features it possesses. The springs of this river well forth out of the plain, and close to its source its streams are navigable, but as they advance they soon become impossible for boats, because spits of rock alternating with one another rise up just below the surface. Round these the current winds of necessity, so rendering the river unnavigable. And in breadth it approaches to the river Eyster, and this is allowed to be the greatest of all the rivers which flow through Europe. Now the woods along the bank closely resemble those of the river in question, and a balm also is distilled from the trees, out of which the Indians make a nuptial ointment. And, unless the contracting parties to the wedding have besprinkled the young couple with this balm, the union is not considered complete nor compatible with Aphrodite, bestowing her grace upon it. Now they say that the grove in the neighborhood of the river is dedicated to this goddess, and also the fishes called peacock fish, which are bred in this river alone, and which have been given the same name as the bird, because their feathers are blue, and their scales spotty, and their tails golden, and because they can fold and spread the latter at will. There is also a creature in this river which resembles a white worm. By melting this down, they make an oil, and from this oil, it appears, there is given off a flame such that nothing but glass can contain it. And this creature may be caught by the king alone, who utilizes it for the capture of cities, for as soon as the fat in question touches the battlements, a fire is kindled which defies all the ordinary means devised by men against combustibles. Chapter 2. And they say that wild asses are also to be captured in these marshes, and these creatures have a horn upon the forehead, with which they butt like a bull, and make a noble fight of it. The Indians make this horn into a cup, for they declare that no one can ever fall sick on the day on which he has drunk out of it, nor will any one who has done so be the worse for being wounded. And he will be able to pass through fire unscathed, and he is even immune from poisonous draughts which others would drink to their harm. Accordingly, this goblet is reserved for kings, and the king alone may indulge in the chase of this creature. And Apollonius says that he saw this animal and admired its natural features, but when Damis asked him if he believed the story about the goblet, he answered, "I will believe it, if I find the king of the Indians hereabout to be immortal. For surely a man who can offer me or any one else a draught potent against disease, and so wholesome, will he not be much more likely to imbibe it himself, and take a drink out of this horn every day, even at the risk of intoxication? For no one, I conceive, would blame him for exceeding in such cups." Chapter 3. At this place they say that they also fell in with a woman who was black from her head to her bosom, but was altogether white from her bosom down to her feet, and the rest of the party fled from her, believing her to be a monster. But Apollonius clasped the woman by the hand, and understood what she was, for in fact such a woman in India is consecrated to Aphrodite, and a woman is born piebald in honour of this goddess, such as is Apis among the Egyptians. Chapter 4. They say that from this point they crossed the part of the Caucasus which stretches down to the Red Sea, and this range is thickly overgrown with aromatic shrubs. The spurs then of the mountain bear the cinnamon tree, which resembles the young tendrils of the vine, and the goat gives sure indication of this aromatic shrub. For if you hold out a bit of cinnamon to the goat, she will whine and whimper after your hand like a dog, and will follow you when you go away, pressing her nose against it. But if the goat herd drags her away, she will moan as if she were torn away from the lotus. But on the steps of this mountain there grow very lofty frankincense trees, as well as many other species, for example, the pepper trees, which are cultivated by the apes. Nor did they neglect to record the look and appearance of this tree, and I will repeat exactly their account of it. The pepper tree resembles in general the willow of the Greeks, and particularly in regard to the berry of the fruit, and it grows in steep ravines where it cannot be got at by men, and where a community of apes is said to live in the recesses of the mountain and in any of its glens. And these apes are held in great esteem by the Indians, because they harvest the pepper for them, and they drive the lions off them with dogs and weapons. For the lion, when he is sick, attacks the ape in order to get a remedy, for the flesh of the ape stays the course of his disease, and he attacks it when he is grown old to get a meal. For the lions, when they are past hunting stags and wild boars, gobble up the apes, and husband for their pursuit whatever strength they have left. The inhabitants of the country, however, are not disposed to allow this, because they regard these animals as their benefactors, and so make war against the lions in behalf of them. For this is the way they go to work in collecting the pepper. The Indians go up to the lower trees and pluck off the fruit, and they make little round shallow pits around the trees, into which they collect the pepper, carelessly tossing it in as if it had no value and was of no serious use to mankind. Then the monkeys mark their actions from above out of their fastness, and when the night comes on they imitate the action of the Indians, and twisting off the twigs of the trees they bring and throw them into the pits in question. Then the Indians at daybreak carry away the heaps of the spice which they have thus got without any trouble, and indeed during the repose of slumber.
Chapter 5.
After crossing the top of the mountain, they say they saw a smooth plain seamed with cuts and ditches full of water, some of which were carried crosswise, whilst others were straight. These are derived from the river Ganges, and serve both for boundaries, and also are distributed over the plain when the soil is dry. But they say that this soil is the best in India, and constitutes the greatest of the territorial divisions of that country, extending in length towards the Ganges a journey of 15 days, and of 18 from the sea to the mountain of the apes along which it skirts. The whole soil of the plain is black and fertile of everything, for you can see on it standing corn as high as reeds, and you can also see beans 3 times as large as the Egyptian kind, as well as sesame and millet of enormous size. And they say that nuts also grow there, of which many are treasured up in our temples here as objects of curiosity. But the vines which grow there are small, like those of the Lydians and Maeones. Their vintage, however, is not only drinkable, but has a fine bouquet from the first. They also say that they came upon a tree there resembling a laurel, upon which there grew a cup or husk resembling a very large pomegranate, and inside the cup there was a kernel as blue as the cups of the hyacinth, but sweeter to the taste than any of the fruits the seasons bring. Chapter 6. Now as they descended the mountain, they say they came in for a dragon hunt, which I must needs describe. For it is utterly absurd for those who are amateurs of hare hunting to spin yarns about the hare, as to how it is caught or ought to be caught. and yet that we should omit to describe a chase as bold as it is wonderful, and in which the sage was careful to assist. So I have written the following account of it. The whole of India is girt with dragons of enormous size, for not only the marshes are full of them, but the mountains as well, and there is not a single ridge without one. Now the marsh kind are sluggish in their habits, and are 30 cubits long, and they have no crest standing up on their heads, but in this respect resemble the she-dragons. Their backs, however, are very black, with fewer scales on them than the other kinds. And Homer has described them with deeper insight than have most poets. For he says that the dragon that lived hard by the springs of Aulis had a tawny back, but other poets declare that the congener of this one in the grove of Nemea also had a crest, a feature which we could not verify in regard to the marsh dragons.
Chapter 7.
And the dragons along the foothills and the mountain crests make their way into the plains after their quarry, and prey upon all the creatures in the marshes. For indeed they reach an extreme length, and move faster than the swiftest of rivers, so that nothing escapes them. These actually have a crest of moderate extent and height when they are young, but as they reach their full size it grows with them, and extends to a considerable height, at which time also they turn red and get serrated backs. This kind also have beards, and lift their necks on high, while their scales glitter like silver, and the pupils of their eyes consist of a fiery stone, and they say that this has an uncanny power for many secret purposes. The plain specimen falls the prize of the hunters whenever it draws upon itself an elephant, for the destruction of both creatures is the result, and those who capture the dragons are rewarded by getting the eyes and skin and teeth. In most respects they resemble the largest swine, but they are slighter in build and flexible, and they have teeth as sharp and indestructible as those of the largest fishes. Chapter 8. Now the dragons of the mountains have scales of a golden colour, and in length excel those of the plain, and they have bushy beards, which also are of a golden hue, and their eyebrows are more prominent than those of the plain, and their eye is sunk deep under the eyebrow, and emits a terrible and ruthless glance. And they give off a noise like the clashing of brass whenever they are burrowing under the earth, and from their crests, which are all fiery red, there flashes a fire brighter than a torch. They also can catch the elephants, though they are themselves caught by the Indians in the following manner. They embroider golden runes on a scarlet cloak, which they lay in front of the animal's burrow after charming them to sleep with the runes, for this is the only way to overcome the eyes of the dragon, which are otherwise inflexible, and much mysterious lore is sung by them to overcome him. These runes induce the dragon to stretch his neck out of his burrow and fall asleep over them. Then the Indians fall upon him as he lies there, and dispatch him with blows of their axes, and having cut off the head, they despoil it of its gems. And they say that in the heads of the mountain dragons there are stored away stones of flowery colour, which flash out all kinds of hues, and possess a mystical power if set in a ring, like that which they say belonged to Gyges. But often the Indian, in spite of his axe and his cunning, is caught by the dragon, who carries him off to his burrow, and almost shakes the mountains as he disappears. These are also said to inhabit the mountains in the neighbourhood of the Red Sea, and they say that they heard them hissing terribly, and that they saw them go down to the shore and swim far out into the sea. It was impossible, however, to ascertain the number of years that this creature lives, nor would any statements be believed. This is all I know about dragons. Chapter 9. They tell us that the city under their mountain is of great size, and called Parax, and that in the centre of it are stored up a great many heads of dragons, for the Indians who inhabit it are trained from their boyhood in this form of sport. And they are also said to acquire an understanding of the language and ideas of animals by feeding either on the heart or the liver of the dragon. And as they advanced, they thought they heard the pipe of some shepherd marshalling his flock, but it turned out to be a man looking after a herd of white hinds, for the Indians use these for milking, and find their milk very nutritious. Chapter 10. From this point their road led for 4 days across a rich and well-cultivated country, till they approached the castle of the sages, when their guide bade his camel crouch down, and leapt off it in such an agony of fear that he was bathed in perspiration. Apollonius, however, quite understood where he was come to, and smiling at the panic of the Indians, said, "It seems to me that this fellow, were he a mariner who had reached harbour after a long sea voyage, would worry at being on land and tremble at being on dock." And as he said this, he ordered his camel to kneel down, for indeed he was by now well accustomed to do so. But it seems that what scared the guide so much was that he was now close to the sages. For the Indians fear these people more than they do their own king, because the very king to whom the land is subject consults them about everything that he has to say or do, just as people who send to an oracle of a god, and the sages indicate to him what it is expedient for him to do and what is inexpedient, and dissuade and warn him off with signs. Chapter 11. And they were about to halt in the neighbouring village, which is hardly distant a single state from the eminence occupied by the sages, when they saw a youth run up to them, the blackest Indian they ever saw, and between his eyebrows was a crescent-shaped spot which shone brightly. But I learned that at a later time the same feature was remarked in the case of Menon, the pupil of Herod the Sophist, who was an Ethiop. It showed while he was a youth, but as he grew up to a man's estate, its splendour waned, and finally disappeared with his youth. But the Indian also wore, they say, a golden anchor, which is affected by Indians as a herald's badge, because it holds all things fast. Chapter 12. Then he ran up to Apollonius, and addressed him in the Greek tongue, and so far this did not seem so remarkable, because all the inhabitants of the village spoke the Greek tongue. But when he addressed him by name, and said, "Hail, so-and-so," the rest of the party were filled with astonishment, though our sage only felt the more confidence in his mission. For he looked to Damis and said, "We have reached men who are unfeignedly wise, for they seem to have the gift of foreknowledge." And he at once asked the Indian what he must do, because he was already eager for an interview, and the Indian replied, "Your party must halt here, but you must come on just as you are, for the masters themselves issue this command." Chapter 13. The word "masters" at once had a Pythagorean ring for the ears of Apollonius, and he gladly followed the messenger. Now the hill, the summit of which is inhabited by the sages is, according to the account of our travellers, of about the same height as the Acropolis of Athens, and it rises straight up from the plain, though its natural position equally secures it from attack, for the rock surrounds it on all sides. On many parts of this rock you see traces of cloven feet, and outlines of beards and of faces, and here and there impressions of backs, as of persons who had slipped and rolled down. For they say that Dionysus, when he was trying to storm the place together with Hercules, ordered the Pans to attack it, thinking that they would be strong enough to take it by assault. But they were thunderstruck by the sages, and fell one way, and another, and the rocks, as it were, took the print of the various postures in which they fell and failed. and they say that they saw a cloud floating round the eminence on which the Indians live, and render themselves visible or invisible at will. Whether there were any other gates to the eminence, they say they did not know, for the cloud around it did not anywhere allow them to be seen, whether there was an opening in the rampart, or whether on the other hand it was a close-shut fortress. Chapter 14. Apollonius says that he himself ascended mostly on the south side of the ridge, following the Indian, and that the first thing he saw was a well 4 fathoms deep, above the mouth of which there rose a sheen of deep blue light, and at midday, when the sun was stationary about it, the sheen of light was always drawn up on high by the rays, and in its ascent assumed the look of a glowing rainbow. But he learnt afterwards that the soil underneath the well was composed of a real gar, but that they regarded the water as holy and mysterious, and no one either drank it or drew it up, but it was regarded by the whole land of India all around as binding in oaths. And near this there was a crater, he says, of fire, which sent up a lead-coloured flame, though it emitted no smoke or any smell, nor did this crater ever overflow, but emitted just matter enough not to bubble over the edges of the pit. It is here that the Indians purify themselves of involuntary sins, wherefore the sages call the well of testing, and the fire of pardon. And they say that they saw there 2 jars of black stone, of the rains and of the winds respectively. The jars of the rains, they say, is opened in case the land of India is suffering from drought, and sends up clouds to moisten the whole country. But if the rains should be in excess, they are stopped by the jar being shut up. But the jar of winds plays, I imagine, the same role as the bag of Aeolus, for when they open this jar ever so little, they let out one of the winds which creates a seasonable breeze by which the country is refreshed. And they say that they came upon statues of gods, and they were not nearly so much astonished at finding Indian or Egyptian gods as they were by finding the most ancient of the Greek gods, the statue of Athene Polias, and of Apollo of Delos, and of Dionysus of Lemne, and another of him at Amyclea, and others of similar age. These were set up by these Indians, and worshipped with Greek rites, and they say that they are met with in the heart of India. Now they regard the summit of this hill as the navel of the earth, and on it they worship fire with mysterious rites, deriving the fire, according to their own account, from the rays of the sun. And to the sun they sing a hymn every day at midday. Chapter 15. Apollonius himself describes the character of these sages and of their settlement upon the hill, for in one of his addresses to the Egyptians he says, "I saw Indian Brahmans living upon the earth, and yet not on it, and fortified without fortifications, and possessing nothing, yet having the riches of all men." He may indeed be thought to have here written with too much subtlety, but we have anyhow the account of Damis, to the effect that they made a practice of sleeping on the ground, and that they strewed the ground with such grass as they might themselves prefer. And what is more, he says that he saw them levitating themselves 2 cubits high from the ground, not for the sake of miraculous display, for they disdain any such ambition, but they regard any rites they perform in thus quitting earth and walking with the sun as acts of homage acceptable to the god. Moreover, they neither burn upon an altar nor keep in stoves the fire which they extract from the sun's rays, although it is a material fire, but like the rays of sunlight when they are refracted in water, so this fire is seen raised aloft in the air and dancing in the ether. And further, they pray to the sun who governs the seasons by his might, that the latter may succeed duly in the land, so that India may prosper. But of a night they entreat the ray of light not to take the night amiss, but to stay with them just as they have brought it down. Such then was the meaning of the phrase of Apollonius that "the Brahmans are upon earth, and yet not upon the earth," and his phrase "fortified without fortifications or walls" refers to the air or vapour under which they bivouac; for though they seem to live in the open air, yet they raise up a shadow and veil themselves in it, so that they are not made wet when it rains, and they enjoy the sunlight whenever they choose. And the phrase "without possessing anything they had the riches of all men" is thus explained by Damas. All the springs which the Bacchanals see leaping up from the ground under their feet, whenever Dionysus stirs them and earth in a common convulsion, spring up in plenty for these Indians also when they are entertaining or being entertained. Apollonius therefore was right in saying that people provided as they are with all they want offhand and without having prepared anything, possess what they do not possess. And on principle they grow their hair long, as the Lacedaemonians did of old, and the people of Thurium and Tarentum, as well as the Melians, and all who set store by the fashions of Sparta, and they bind a white turban on their heads, and their feet are naked for walking, and they cut their garments to resemble the exomis. But the material of which they make their raiment is a wool that springs wild from the ground, white like that of the Pamphylians, though it is of softer growth, and a grease like olive oil distills from off it. This is what they make their sacred vesture of, and if anyone else except these Indians tries to pluck it up, the earth refuses to surrender its wool. And they all carry both a ring and a staff, of which the peculiar virtues can affect all things, and the one and the other, so we learn, are prized as secrets. End of Volume 1, Book 3, Chapters 1 through 15.